For those who came to 2 weeks ago, we had an event with Gary Johnson and Paul Armentano speaking here on campus. And tonight we're privileged to have Judge Jim Gray come here all the way from Orange County, California to speak. So let's give him a big round of applause this evening. I'm going to do a fairly short, brief introduction before we get Mr. Gray up here to speak this evening. James P. Gray has been a trial judge in Orange County, California since 1983. Before becoming a judge, he served as a volunteer in the Peace Corps in Costa Rica, a staff judge advocate and criminal defense attorney in the Navy JAG Corps, a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles, and a civil litigation attorney in a private law firm. In addition to being a Republican candidate for U.S. Congress in 1998 and a Libertarian candidate for U.S. Senate in 2004, Judge Gray has discussed issues of drug policy on more than 200 television and radio shows and public forums all across the country. Using his experience on the bench and elsewhere, he has also authored a book on the failed war on drugs, Another Wearing the Robe, about practical and ethical issues in being a judge, and he has composed a musical that encourages young people to expand their horizons and live a fuller life. Read more about Judge Jim Gray on his website, www.jimgray.com. And without further ado, we'll go ahead and get Mr. Judge Jim Gray up here. Give him a big round of applause, everybody.
Always try. Not successful. Okay, well, good evening. Can we liberate this?
Let's see here.
Probably not. Not looking to do it.
I think it's locked on it.
Yeah. I think it's going to stay where it is. So am I then. Good evening. I know you're out there. Good evening. I should say. It is certainly nice to be with you, and it's certainly, and thank you, Kyle, for the introduction and for your sharing the evening with us. I did something really unusual for a sitting trial court judge to do in Orange County or really anywhere else. Back in April of 1992, I held a press conference as a sitting judge saying that in my view, based upon my experience, my observations, what we were doing in our country with regard to our nation's drug policy simply was not working, and I gave some definite suggestions on what we should do thereafter. And it probably had the desired effect. As a fairly conservative judge in a conservative county who has never used any form of illicit substances, I'll leave it to you, but fairly clean cut, I really forced people to at least to address the message, to at least address the circumstance. And thereafter, since April of 1992, I've been speaking as often as I can, consistent with getting my work done on this critical issue, because I think it's probably the most critical issue facing our country today, and that is our nation's policy of drug prohibition. So wherever I go, pretty much, and I'm about to do the same thing here, I ask the question, because forget my experience. Who cares what Jim Gray thinks? I don't have any particular expertise about what to do. But use your own experience, use your own background, use your own insights. How many of you believe, based upon your own insights, that we in the United States of America are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to this critical issue of drug use and abuse and all the crime and misery that goes with it? Okay, I see no hands, and that is completely consistent with every other group that I speak with, and it really doesn't matter the group. It can be an educational group like you, it can be a religious organization, a chamber of commerce, civic club, whatever. People realize what we're doing isn't working. Well, what's the first realization then after coming to that conclusion? I think that's pretty straightforward. And it is, we have no reasonable, legitimate expectation of being in better shape next year than we're in today, unless we change our approach. Fair enough? Well, then what should we do? Well, seemingly as a caring, considerate, intelligent people, we should look at what we've done over the last 5, 10, 50, 100 years that has worked and not worked, and hopefully start gravitating over toward what works. How radical can that be? But why be so myopic? Why not keep our blinders on, Let's look and see what other countries have done that have worked and not worked and learn from their experience. Yes, I understand we're not the same country as Holland or New Zealand or Switzerland, but we certainly can learn from their experiences. So I have been speaking publicly about this very issue to lots and lots of different people. And I truly remember one of the introductions was a lot less laudatory than you just heard from Kyle. In fact, I can tell it to you verbatim, quite a bit shorter. And it was, I know you all want to hear the latest dope from the courthouse, so here's Judge Gray. But I do continue to discuss this as much as I can, and people are starting to understand. People are starting to allow themselves to discuss this issue. And in fact, yes, I wrote a book on drug policy called Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. If you can get through the title, you know exactly where I'm going. But when people ask me to sign that, I will say, and I mean it, it's okay to discuss drug policy. Because in this drug prohibition program that we also have a prohibition on discussion. And shame on us. It's okay to discuss drug policy. Just because we do that does not mean we condone people using any of these illegal drugs. But it does mean that there is an acknowledgement that there has to be a better way. In fact, I'll go so far as to make two claims to you, and I'll stand by each one. They sound like exaggerations, but they're not. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. We couldn't do it worse if we tried. Now, Kyle told me that you folks have, he brought in some of the most intelligent students here at Missouri Southern, and that they were all going to sit on my left of the auditorium, and I am sure that's right. So I'm going to give you an assignment that you are going to stay with each other for the next 30 hours, and the project is to design a worse drug policy than the one we have in the United States of America today, and you couldn't. We're taking it on the chin in every way imaginable, and it doesn't matter how. The United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of its people. The United States has 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. You know, here, I assure you, we're number one does not make me proud. Does it you? You know, are we a more evil people that we have to put in more people in custody because of our evil nature? No, I don't think so. In fact, the United States has a stronger, more radical, if you will, program on drug prohibition pretty much than any other Western industrialized country. We also have a worse drug problem than any other Western industrialized country, and I'm convinced that there is a connection. We have lost more of our civil liberties because of the war on drugs than anything in our history. And in fact, I'm writing a new edition of my book. I have a chapter on the erosion of our civil liberties, and the new subchapter heading is going to be, where's Paul Revere? Why is no one spreading the alarm? Because if we lose our civil liberties, you almost never get them back from the government. That's just a minor thing. And are we better shape today because we've lost all of these civil liberties under the Fourth Amendment for search and seizure, First Amendment, Sixth Amendment? No, we're not in better shape at all. The irony of this is, the real irony, you could bulldoze the entire country of Colombia, obliterate it from the face of the earth, and it wouldn't make any difference at all with regard to our drug problems here. Why? Because as long as the demand is here, the demand will be met. Simple economics. You cannot repeal the law of supply and demand. And if the demand for our drugs is not met by Colombia, it will be met by Nigeria, or Panama, or Thailand, or California. Do you know what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? It is marijuana. Number 2 is grapes, by the way, if you care. So these are things that we simply must recognize. If you have, figuratively or literally, somebody standing on a street corner in my hometown in Orange County, or here in Joplin, or anywhere else, with a $20 bill in his or her hand saying, "Give me some drugs," I absolutely guarantee you somebody will fill that need. They will fill that need. And so we just need to recognize this. So we need to start making some distinctions. And one of them is, there's a difference, a major, a substantial difference between drug harms on the one hand, and I'm not minimizing them. I think these sometimes addicting drugs, sometimes dangerous drugs, certainly can be harmful. There's no question about it. But we need to make a distinction between drug harms on the one hand and drug money harms on the other. You look at Mexico today, and it's now in our headlines, thankfully, because these people are bleeding and dying, violent deaths. Why? Not because of drugs. It has virtually nothing to do with drugs. It has everything to do with drug money. So we need to make those distinctions between drug harms on the one hand and drug money harms on the other. Now we can resolve the drug money harms. Let's look back at alcohol prohibition. When we finally came to our senses and repealed alcohol prohibition, did the harms of alcohol go away? No, they're still with us, but the harms of the pollutants in the alcohol went away almost overnight. What I would call the bathtub gin problems, where if you got a bad batch during alcohol prohibition and it happened with some regularity, people would attack their nervous system. Sometimes it would kill them. Sometimes they'd be in a coma. Those problems went away. The same thing will happen with regard to drug prohibition. In fact, as a sitting judge, I still remember I sentenced a young man one time for being under the influence of methamphetamines. And at time of sentencing in California, and I hope here too, anyone who is about to be sentenced has a right to make a statement if they want to. So, young man, would you like to make a statement? Yes, Your Honor, I would. Now, by the way, this was going to be pretty much an automatic sentence because there's a mandatory minimum sentence in California for anybody that's under the influence of methamphetamines or narcotic must go to jail a minimum of 90 days. And I certainly wasn't going to give more than that. So we pretty much knew that was going to be the sentence. Your Honor, my drug of choice is marijuana. And for years now, I've been buying my marijuana from the same supplier. And one fine day, this guy sold me some marijuana that, unbeknownst to me, was laced with methamphetamines. So I smoked it a few times, and I got myself hooked. And I thought to myself, that's a problem we could address. And if you're going to be out there, you, your neighbors, anybody, is going to be out there buying illegal marijuana today, you're probably associating with people that you probably would really rather not be with. And those people, by the way, have a vested interest in getting you hooked on methamphetamines or cocaine or whatever else. Why? The answer to most of the questions that I'm going to ask this evening can be answered by a one-word answer, and that is money. If they get you hooked on additional drugs, they'll make more money on you. And they have every desire to do it. And you might say, oh, wait a minute. Nobody wants my 14-year-old daughter or sister to get hooked on cocaine. And the answer is, yes, they do. Why? Because they make more money. It's despicable, and it happens all the time. So again, these are distinctions we need to make. Make a distinction between drug harms and drug money harms. Let's make another distinction, critically important. And that is, it makes as much sense to me to put this gifted actor Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin problem. And by the way, he's always will be a recovering